You've got questions? O'Reilly Auto Parts has answers. Need a pro you can trust? We've got that too. No matter what you need, our professional parts people have the training and expertise to help you do things right. Deep automotive knowledge, just one part that makes O'Reilly stand apart. The professional parts people.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You are now entering the Pseudo-Archaeology Podcast, a show that uncovers what's fact, what's fake, and what's fun in the crazy world of pseudo-archaeology. Hello and welcome to the Pseudo-Archaeology Podcast, episode 151. I am your host, Dr. Andrew Kinkella, and tonight, Ancient Apocalypse 2, The Americas, for when one apocalypse is not enough. So, hey everyone, welcome back. I thought I'd do another special edition of the Pseudo-Archaeology Podcast, because aren't all the editions special? It's just different levels of special. This one's extra special. Or maybe, you can have your own vote. Maybe it's moderately special. Just depends. And of course, I got to do, Graham Hancock just did Ancient Apocalypse 2, right? And this is a 6-episode series. I think the other one only 6 episodes? I feel like the other one was a bit more, but it doesn't matter. This is going to be, of course, more of the same with some different viewpoints by me. And I'll get there as I get there. First off, what's funny is this is the 3rd podcast I'm recording today. It started early in the morning with a podcast called Screens of the Stone Age. And I really like those guys. They do like kind of a YouTube channel too at the same time. So Screens of the Stone Age, of course, is several archaeologists who get together and talk about mainly movies, right? Like movies and how close or how far away they are from archaeological reality. That's fun, right? Josh and Ross and Kim like doing that show. I always enjoy doing it with those guys. And they had said, hey, we should do Ancient Apocalypse season 2, but just the 6th episode, just the last one. So I had already just talked with them about that. And I'm like, dude, I should do the whole thing for my podcast. Actually, between then and now, though, I also just recorded the CRM Archaeology Podcast. And now my 3rd and last podcast of the day. Good God. So I had touched on some of this on the Screens of the Stone Age. But what I will say, of course, is I'll start at the end and just say that this show, unfortunately, is just pushing that same overarching narrative that Graham Hancock always does. This idea that there was an ancient super civilization at the end of the last ice age. Again, this is going to be around 13,000 years ago, give or take, right in there. And there was this one super civilization that had, kind of all the answers and all the technology and all that good stuff wiped out by a comet impact that never happened. And they were wiped out because not only was there a comet impact, but the comet impact enabled a giant flood, which never happened. And after this flood, the stragglers just thought, hey, we're the few stragglers of an ancient super civilization. Let's split up and move all around the world and teach the lowly tribal level societies about real civilization, right? Because as we all know, other societies around the world could never figure this out for themselves. So that is always his underlying story. And it's just a 10 degrees barely of difference from the Atlantis myth. We're just going on with the Atlantis myth, but now instead of saying the words Atlantis, you go ancient super civilization, right? And that whole thing is just ludicrous and tired. As we'll see, though, this series made me extra sad, actually. And it's sad in terms of archaeology. It was sad in terms of the resources spent toward this, and honestly, Graham Hancock's talents as a host, and just how all of that is so wasted. And let me explain. I'm going to let's start out with some positive things. What did Graham Hancock do in this series that was positive? It's largely very similar to what he did last time in terms of the positivity. I can say that the production value of this show, very high. I can say that the writing of this show is quite good, even though some of the stuff they say is, of course, ludicrous. The overall organization of the writing, the flow of the writing through the episodes, dude, not like good for them. There's obviously total professionals who are working on this show. The animation, they do these little animation bits where they explain things like maybe it's the Maya numbering system or these kind of stuff. Their animations are great. And actually, as we'll dive into in a minute, the setup of their stories tends to be quite good. My meaning there is, Graham Hancock will talk about something like the ancient Maya, and the setup backstory might be totally fine. It'll be like, oh yeah, that's factually correct. But then, of course, his conclusions are terrible. Graham Hancock is a fine host and a good narrator, and he knows how to keep his audience hooked. So he is a skilled, narrator and host. So like, good for him. Oh, I will also say in this entire show, I don't think there were any aliens whatsoever. So again, no aliens. Okay. The downsides are always the same. It's like probably the worst part is just the idea of the stupid super civilization thing and the idea of extreme diffusion. This is the idea that, all cultures on Earth have some sort of influence from one central spot, which is just utterly not true, right? So this idea of extreme diffusion is just foolish. The comparisons he makes between different cultures, it'll be like, oh, this god is just like this god over here. No, they're not. They're very, very different. And just to compare them is stupid. It's extreme cherry picking, right? This is taking little bits of data, but it's so extreme that I think many, even people of the sort of general public just watching the show will be like, I don't know how much sense that makes. And then use of dating throughout this too is really terrible. It has nothing to do with reality. There are dates that he'll sneaky on out that actually don't relate to what you're seeing on screen, but it seems like it's supposed to, but it doesn't. And it's really, it's sneaky and it's unfair to the audience. So you do have that part too. As I go through this, I'll just talk about little bits and bobs that I thought were interesting, or that I can kind of I can give a counterpoint to. I'm not going to try and explain every single thing that he does wrong here, because it's not worth it. We'll be here all day, and it's no fun. You understand that I know that there was no such thing as some freaky disaster around 13,000 years ago where a great flood came and knocked out a super civilization. My big point on that, too, is always super civilizations only lived on beachfront property. Just not a fan of the mountains. What? The idea that they're, everything they once did is completely gone. It's just foolish. It has nothing to do with reality or how archaeology or how archaeological sites are formed over time. How things fall apart and aren't used anymore. There's no way that there would be nothing left. Makes no sense. Anyway, let's get into the episodes. In general, I find that the first handful of episodes are not nearly as bad, and then it falls off a cliff. Episode 1. So, of course, Graham Hancock's going to start with mainstream archaeology is closed-minded. They deny his ideas. They don't like him. He always has to set that up, as just to tell the audience, hey, what you think are facts, oh, those aren't facts. That's just done by big archaeology, right? He always has to set the stage with that, which he does. And then goes on and talks about a site called White Sands, which is in New Mexico. White Sands is a very cool site. White Sands does have some dates that, if they ultimately end up being true, does change our view on peopling of the New World a little bit. Like, that's a fair ball. So his setup, his explanation of White Sands, what they found at White Sands are basically possibly human footprints that are with giant sloths. Like, that's cool, and they're dating to 23,000 years or so. That is correct to some of the stuff they're finding. So that's all good. I will say that the peopling of the New World, and you guys have probably heard me say this before, peopling of the New World is the single hardest question to answer in all of archaeology. I pick it as number one. Now, a classic reading of people of the New World today, I think most archaeologists would agree that about 17,000 years ago or so is the earliest, right? The idea being that people first came in to North America from Asia about 17,000 years ago, give or take it. We have decent evidence up through 15 and a half, and then once you get, and you maybe add on a little, okay, 16 and a half, maybe 17 is probably when they first did this. That's really what it looks like. White Sands bumps that out to 23. So it's not insane, right? It's cool. Now, there are, in the behind the scenes archaeology world, there's little bits and bobs of problems like, oh, is the dating completely correct? Or is the site, are the footprints actually human for sure? There's these little bits and bobs that still have to be figured out. But this is not a fake site, you guys. Like, White Sands is real. And I'm really excited to see what ultimately comes from it. It's new. Archaeology has to be slow in terms of the sort of looking at the dates and sort of comparing it to other things and stuff. So it'll take some time. But to do a show and talk about White Sands at 23,000 is not crazy. It's totally fine. Again, this is the part that makes me sad, because I think that overall, Graham Hancock and the Ancient Apocalypse team did a great setup of White Sands, a great little vignette on this is the site. Isn't it awesome? Shouldn't you be interested in this? It's all great. But then, of course, they add in stuff like, oh, but then the comets came 13,000 years ago and killed off all the megafauna, which isn't true. The megafauna didn't all die like 1 year on a Tuesday. It's much more varied. And, adding it into proof of the super civil. Oh, damn it. So it's sad. It's sad. Right after this point, he brings out Keanu Reeves. Keanu Reeves is honestly not in it that much. They make a big thing about this. But whatever. Keanu Reeves is just like, he says some very vague stuff, that's his job. He just kind of goes, well, that's interesting. So I don't, Keanu Reeves being in it or out of it, like, yeah, whatever. It's just kind of silly, but that's showbiz, man. Then he goes to the Amazon. And this is another moment where pretty good. And they do this thing on the episodes between each episode where they kind of start their next theme that they're going to talk about in the next episode. So episode 1 is really White Sands. And then they go to new finds in the Amazon just as a teaser. And then episode 2 is really on the Amazon. So as they talk about the Amazon, this is the other one where I'm like, this is really not bad. It's like, this is a setup of current information on the Amazon. They talk about LiDAR data, which has really expanded our views on some of the Amazonian stuff. They do talk about archaeology of they don't make it explicit because they want it to sound bad. But archaeology of 50 years ago, yeah, they did poo-poo the Amazon a little too much. They were a bit too conservative. The idea being that, oh, no complex societies could really live there. It's just sort of hunters and gatherers. But the LiDAR data and the settlement data really show that it's not, that there's more there. Now, well, I said the setup is good. They really did a good job of showing the LiDAR data, showing all these mounds and stuff that are actually in the Amazon, and showing these evidence of these older cultures that were there that would have been complex to a degree. They incorrectly, I would say, call them cities. They're not cities. They're kind of what we would call kind of low density urban areas. They're like a very complex village, I would say, or this kind of thing, which does make a difference, because I don't want people to be thinking there's huge pyramids in the middle of the Amazon, because it really looks like there's not. Right. This is more to get into the bits and bobs that kind of a chiefdom level society. It reminds me of the very early Olmec stuff in the Maya area. So it's not as complex, not as huge as the Maya, but they're sort of starting to get it together. And they have the geoglyphs that they found, all really, really cool stuff. But I also want to talk about in terms of these mound groups and these geoglyphs, which are just sort of large, often kind of rectangular or circular earthen structures, right? That these things all date often within the last 1,000 years. Like if you have one reaching out to maybe 2,000 years old, that's pretty old, right? But they have these times where they're sort of built and not built and then kind of built again. But it's in that range. Let's say the last 2,000 years. They then cut over to a rock art site called Serra de Petunia, I believe, or something similar to that, where there's this rock art, right? And it's in the Amazon area. And he says that there's stuff around there that's dated to 13,000 years. Yes, I'm sure you could find some burned piece of charcoal under the ground deep enough that dates to 13,000 years. But though that rock art is not 13,000 years old. Just so you know, it is not. That is definitely from the last 1,000 years. And this is rock art just out on a stone, right? Out on sort of a cliff face in the middle of the elements. Like that stuff is not going to last. So I would even think it was from like the last 500 years or so. I would think it would be quite recent. So, but they make this connection, like somehow it's ancient. And of course, the idea is that this art is somehow from these, ancient peoples or something. It's just all BS. So that's sad. Again, I get sad. I get sad when I see these great setups made by obviously good people on the production company, on the writing side and everything, and with the great camera work and the sites, the stuff looks great. And even the people they interview, half the time they're kind of silly, but the other half of the time they're pretty cool. But then to add this, and therefore it's just there's an ancient super civilization. It's so sad. It's such a waste of time. But speaking of sad, when we come back, let's fall off a cliff and talk about Easter Island.
At your job, do you ever have to deal with a nose roller? How about a snub pulley? Well, if you're installing a new conveyor belt system, dealing with the different components can sound like you're speaking a foreign language. Luckily, you've got a team ready to help. Grainger's technical product specialists are fluent in maintenance, repair, and operations. So whenever you want to talk shop, just reach out. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hello, and welcome back to the Pseudo-Archaeology Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Andrew Kinkella, and we have been discussing Ancient Apocalypse 2, The Americas, the new Graham Hancock special on Netflix. And we are now up to episode 3. So episode 1 was White Sands. Episode 2 is the Amazon. And again, both those episodes in terms of Graham Hancock world are a bit more of a light touch. He did this same thing in season 1. First 2 episodes, not so bad. And then it falls off a cliff. So in season 3, he goes to Easter Island, right? And this is going to be the idea that the Moai are like actually super ancient, or at least the platform that they're built on is, multi thousands of years old. It's all connected to an ancient flood. It's all connected to other worldwide myths, which it's not. This is just extreme diffusion at its worst. And what I see is Graham Hancock's at his worst when he's talking about old stuff he's talked about before. So we're going to get into, like Easter Island and God, what else comes up? And then the Andes in a minute. It's just all total crap. Like these are the worst episodes. He's at his best when he's talking about new stuff, like White Sands is new. And I think it's because there just hasn't been time to have ingrained bullshit. So they have to set up with kind of the facts because that's the story, So I really notice a difference there. So it's pointless to really go in too much to the Easter Island thing. It's just totally dumb. And to add idiocy to more idiocy, he trots out Thor Heyerdahl at the end. And Thor Heyerdahl's whole thing, the Kon-Tiki, I covered that in another episode. Thor Heyerdahl, I thought was really interesting when I was a kid. I was like, wow, this is awesome, because the guy did make this funky, weird balsa raft and sail it from South America out towards the Pacific Islands, going the wrong way that Polynesians wouldn't have gone. But it is definitely true to say that Thor Heyerdahl pushed an extremely racist ideology of like the people of Easter Island are white or had white ancestors. This idea of like the white culture coming, I think, ultimately from crossing the world in their whiteness, and they don't delve very deep into that stuff because Graham Hancock is smart enough not to touch on that. So he kind of skirts around it. But what a pointless waste of time. Like there's no reason to even bring that up. The whole Thor Heyerdahl thing isn't even really very scientific. It's just kind of silly. But it was very interesting for the time. So as we cruise through episode 3, they talk about how plants move throughout the world, how human beings, can bring certain plants for certain uses. That's totally, that happens. And you can look towards plants or domesticated plants to get an idea on age and this kind of thing. I don't know any of the specifics about the Easter Island stuff, but like I do know that, of course, some of the first colonizers to Easter Island, probably from Hawaii or other Polynesian islands like that, would have, of course, brought some of their own stuff to plant and eat. So, anywho, that moves on. Where he then, of course, from Easter Island, jumps over to the Andes into Peru. This part sucks too. Like this is, again, it's old. And this brings in the awful, tired, stupid, pointless waste of time. Can you tell I'm a little negative on this? Of the stones at Sacsayhuaman that are so formed and sculpted so well, carved so well by the ancient craftsmen that nobody knows how it was done. We know exactly how it was done by carving really carefully. Like I'm so tired of this crap, right? It's like, why not just bring out Piri Reis map or something else like that, or Stones of Atlantis, just to kill me right here, right? This stuff is just bottom of the barrel horse shit, which I guess he had to do, maybe it's episode 3 into episode 4. So he's like, this is like the lull. He has this idea that these various places were called navel of the earth and they're everywhere. It's just, oh God, like who, this is pointless. It's funny. I have notes, you guys, that I kind of note little things as I'm watching this. I kind of little stuff to myself, to remember. I wrote sucks and underlined it. Then I wrote boring. And it's unfortunately that is true. Just from a narrative sense, whatever you believe, I would say episode 3 into episode 4 are very slow and just like a little convoluted and odd and strange. It doesn't make much sense. You'll also see every so often he'll interview someone. Always look close what they write under them. There's a guy they interview who's just a researcher of archaeology. That, of course, means they have no real training in archaeology, that anyone could be a researcher. Check out an archaeology book right now from the library. You're now a researcher of archaeology. And that's, of course, the people that get to say the more outlandish, weird stuff. So at this point, I was like, I'm going to have some fun and write down the quotes that you would use if you were having a drinking game, watching Ancient Apocalypse, and you're like, drink every time Graham Hancock says this. Now, I don't condone this game, mainly because you'll get way too drunk way too fast. So here's the quotes. Watch for these, friends. I can't figure it out. It's not possible, or it's impossible. It's a mystery. It doesn't make sense. It's lost technology. We must acknowledge. Open-minded, and it's very enigmatic. Right? There you go. Oh, I also have, it's a mystery and contradiction. And also, they're very simple. We don't know. So these come up so often. And I would say it's a double whammy for the word mystery. It's a mystery. It's a mystery. It's a mystery. So if your drinking game was simply the word mystery, you still probably wouldn't make it to episode 3. And that just gives you an idea. It's this constant, like, we don't know. Who knows? Archaeologists fact. They don't have facts. What do you mean facts? They don't know. Right. And that's where it gets very tired. So I just started to do that for a while. Although I did pay attention. I totally did. I watched the whole thing. They jump back to the Amazon again in episode 4, and they go a little deeper in actually the soil out there. And again, some of this is real. There is this black soil, the sort of black Amazonian soil that portions of it are probably largely human made, meaning that over the centuries and millennia, people who lived there amended their soil to make it better. And of course, they would do it by using like vegetable waste they'd put in there, human waste they'd put in there. They would probably do a little bit of slash and burn, all this kind of stuff to make the soil better, because there are some areas where the soil is pretty crappy. And this stuff reminds me so much of the Maya. It's very similar to the Maya world. So I got no problem, talking about that. They do these overarching, it's so sad. They don't need to do this, where they say, the Amazon is planted. And it's like, no, that's not right. The ancient people did not just like plant all the trees. It wasn't a savanna. And then they like amended the soil and planted huge trees. They lived with their environment. They lived with the jungle. And they would do the equivalent, just like the Maya, where they would manage the jungle, cut out the weeds, but leave the nice big trees and that kind of stuff. Leave the plants that are good, cut out the plants that are bad. Just like you do in your backyard today. Right, they would do that, and then on top of it, have some sort of horticulture or simple agricultural thing. That's kind of the next step that archaeologists can really look at, like how complex was their system of planting crops. Right, it can be more of a gardening kind of thing, or it can be a bigger, like agriculture thing. I think it's a bit more simple than more complex, but that's cool. And then, of course, you got to throw this in. And this next bit, Graham Hancock actually talks about this a lot. And I was surprised it wasn't in the first season of Ancient Apocalypse, or it was so little. But now he really busts out and explains, this is all about drugs, right? The idea that all complex cultures have drugs. You got to do drugs to expand your mind, man. And because of these drugs, it shows you that all the squares and circles that everyone draws all around the world, they're squares and circles, they're all interrelated, man. Because, when I'm really high, we're all one. Do you feel me? I feel it. Do you? I can't see right now. And the whole drug thing is, there's a happy medium where you can say, yes, all cultures have drugs and, have stuff they partake in to kind of change their mindset a little bit, or, make a Saturday night a little more interesting. But this overcooked idea of like, oh, dude, if you don't have shaman with drugs, well, your civilization is just not going to work, and he way overdoes it. And of course, saying that once you're high and you go draw like some rock art, that somehow literally the circles and like the triangles are like all related, around the world. That had to be a super civilization that taught everyone circles and triangles when they're high. And then in a real low point, he also relates it to the Amazon geoglyphs, saying like, oh, dude, when you're high on ayahuasca, or ayahuasca, I should say, when you're high on ayahuasca, that means you're going to go out in the jungle and make big like squares and circles. Because that's what I want to do when I'm high. When I'm high, I'm like, I got to get out there and just like make a berm of dirt. And again, I know I'm having a laugh, but it's silly. It goes on too long. They talk about how ayahuasca is made. Okay. Graham touches on the idea of like indigenous science. The word used science there is kind of a slippery slope, but what you would say is traditional ecological knowledge, which is very cool, right? And very interesting. And that is something very worth studying. It's really fascinating. Like I learned a bunch of interesting stuff in Belize, in the jungle with like the local Belizean guys who really knew a lot about the jungle and about the plants, that's fascinating. And that's something that we can use traditional ecological knowledge in archaeology to explain, certain things we find. So that's awesome. It's like, would I call it science in a Western sense? Not exactly. I'm not poo-pooing it though. You know what I mean? We're splitting hairs. He then, because the Amazon has these geoglyphs or these earthen mounds, he then relates that to like Ohio in the United States, to the mound builders, and then cruises through Chaco Canyon, relates in Göbekli Tepe, and again, one of the more dopey ass ideas. So in the Southwest, they have kivas, which are these circular semi-subterranean locations, right? Which are very like ritual based. The idea, because these are semi-underground, the idea that they're symbolic of when their ancestors had to go underground to protect themselves from the comet. Oh, dude, what's happening? Which, of course, is a hop, skip, and a jump to alignments in terms of how these buildings align: North Star, equinox, moonrise, sunrise, right? All that kind of good stuff. And then we'll take us into our final phase of the ancient Maya. More when we return.
O'Reilly.
You've got questions? O'Reilly Auto Parts has answers. Need a pro you can trust? We've got that too. No matter what you need, our professional parts people have the training and expertise to help you do things right. Deep automotive knowledge, just one part that makes O'Reilly stand apart. The professional parts people.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Hello, and welcome back to the Pseudo Archaeology Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Andrew Kinkella, and we have been discussing Ancient Apocalypse Part 2, and we have flown through it. We are now to episode 6. Episode 6 is upon us, the last episode. And again, what they've done is the end of episode 5, they've introduced the Maya, right? And they are focused on the city of Palenque. Palenque is an awesome archaeological site. I recommend everyone see Palenque before they die. It's definitely in my top 3 ancient Maya city centers to see. Tikal would probably be number 1. Palenque is right in there. It's really pretty. It's really just astonishing, when you walk there. So I would agree with Graham Hancock. Graham does a great job of kind of showing his astonishment, walking around Palenque, especially like in the during sunset or during kind of the golden hour. It's really cool. I mean, dude, we're all going to agree on that. That's awesome. So Graham goes there and he is sort of talking more about various alignments, alignments and by alignments, I mean where buildings at Palenque will align to like spring equinox, and there'll be others, aligned to summer equinox, summer equinox, spring equinox, fall equinox, summer solstice, winter solstice, and so on and so forth. Certain places where the moon rises, certain moments, sunrise, position of Venus. These are all really obvious, important celestial, alignments. Now, many of those are true and fair ball, right? And again, Palenque is a classic Maya site. It's going to be built and used anywhere from, right around the time of Christ. Maybe it took before. It really becomes what we think of as Palenque in the Maya classic period from 250 to around 900 AD. And then it is abandoned after the Maya collapse around 900. Anyway, at around, 600 AD or so, it's cooking on all cylinders. And Graham goes to the Temple of the Sun, talks about these alignments. That Palenque has a Temple of the Sun, which is not its largest temple, but it's got a great name, and it's a name that makes a lot of sense because there's alignments with the sun. He talks about how ancient Maya pyramids or cities kind of connect the world of Danaw, the land, to the sky. That's all very fair. He does the setup of these alignments. I will throw the ancient Maya under the bus a little, as I will do with all ancient cultures, just to remind us that making alignments is easy. Okay, you can do it in your backyard. You can set up a chair to sit in. You can take some sticks. You can put the stick in front of you wherever the sun is rising towards the horizon, and then just keep doing that all day for a year. And then you have a line of sticks, and you're going to know exactly the angle of where the equinox, where the summer, winter solstice, etc. It's easy. Many of us have done this as kids at school. You're just making alignments. So it's cool. I love archaeoastronomy. I mean, I'm a not very closeted total astronomy nerd, but I don't want people to have this idea of how did they do it? It's unknown. No. It's known. And it's pretty easy. It's just that when you align something big, like a pyramid, you're like, wow, but it's easy. If you just stay with it, you're like, we're going to build this pyramid at exactly this angle and it's going to be great. So they did that. Good for them. He then moves on and actually talks about something that I think is kind of fun. Is that there's this tower at Palenque in the Acropolis area. It's like tall and skinny. And Graham talks correctly about when it was found that it didn't have a roof. And when you look at it today, there's a roof they reconstructed on it years ago, 70 years ago or something, or longer. They had no idea what the roof is supposed to look like. So the roof looks like the top of every California Spanish mission ever. It's weird. It's like when you look at it, you're like, why is there a Spanish mission bell tower at the top of this Maya pyramid? It's strange. And it's definitely wrong. And he's a fair ball to say that. And he talks about how the tower may have been an observatory. I don't know if there's really much evidence one way or another for that, but whatever. Where he starts to go down the hole of doom and gloom, as he said, there's some Venus glyphs that were found up there, which is fine if there were. That's Venus was one of the most important celestial objects to the Maya, both as morning star and evening star. So just that it's there, it's in a lot of places. You see the relation to the Venus tables, Venus, lots. So just that it's there doesn't necessarily mean it was an observatory. But then he takes another step and says, and that relates it to Kukulkan, which is basically the Maya version of Quetzalcoatl, the plumed serpent. And that has nothing to do with nothing. Now, yes, you could find times when Quetzalcoatl is related to that. And from now on, I'll just say Quetzalcoatl. I also mean Kukulkan or any other forms of the plumed serpent. But there's no reason to connect that to Quetzalcoatl or anything else. If you just find some Venus glyphs, that doesn't then add up to that. And then he goes on this whole thing about how Quetzalcoatl is related to Chichen Itza, which it is. Chichen Itza is another site in the north, a post-classic site, where actually you would see much more plume serpent imagery. It's much more of a post-classic thing. And by post-classic, I mean from 950 AD until Spanish contact in the 1500s. It's almost more of a central Mexican deity that's kind of has moved into the Maya world for the post-classic. The post-classic Maya world is a bit different than the classic Maya world. So first, just relating that to Palenque is just kind of a waste of everyone's time. And then, of course, he goes down this rabbit hole of Quetzalcoatl being, this bearded guy from across the seas who comes to the Maya world to show them how to be civilized, which is just a big crock of dumbness. Now, there are bits and bobs of a story like this. It gets kind of complicated, but there is possibly a figure that came to Chichen Itza near the beginning of the post-classic period from Tula, which is a place in central Mexico. And this person may have been referred to as Quetzalcoatl or something like this. That's not the end of the world. There could be this real person, but that's not from overseas. That's from another place in Mesoamerica. It makes sense. And we see a lot of Tula influence in the post-classic Maya world. So that's fine. But I think when we hear this story, it's a bastardization of it that the Spanish it's gone through Spanish conquest, and it's like, oh, no. It wasn't a ruler or an important person from Tula. Oh, it was Cortez or your conquistador of the day from a war beyond the seas, and he came. No. That whole Quetzalcoatl as Cortez thing is a very obviously contact period. It doesn't have the depth of these stories. And then Graham relates Quetzalcoatl to like Osiris in Egypt. There's no relation between these two gods. It's just apples and oranges. It's like, what? That was just senseless. Meant nothing. Oh, I will say, let's learn something real for a second and just say Quetzalcoatl it's kind of a hard god to pin down. Because like in the Maya world, you'll have something like Chak. Chak is the rain god. That's easy, right? Chak controls like lightning and rain, and you get it. It's like, oh, you want Chak to come to bring the rain. Understood. So what's Quetzalcoatl's job? Quetzalcoatl, the plume serpent, to me, he's mostly known for kind of a wind god. And if you're a wind god in the Maya realm, you're going to have aspects of rain and thunder and this kind of stuff. But you're mainly the wind god. And it feels weird to us because we're like, a wind god? What's that? Who needs it? But if you're living and working in the jungle in the Maya lowlands, it's almost never windy. There's certain times when there's just no wind. It's totally still. When the rain comes, what happens is everything's still. And then a cold wind whips up. And you're like, oh no, because you have 20 seconds before there's going to be a downpour. And that is Quetzalcoatl, right? Whipping his serpent tail and having the wind go before Chak's going to come and downpour and dump on you. So that makes way more sense to me, having worked in the jungle. And I get that. Quetzalcoatl's been around so long, though, that he kind of morphed a little bit. And there's other aspects that they tack to him, which is fine because it's a long time between the classic period and the post-classic. We're talking thousands of years. Beliefs and symbolism changes. So that's what I think when I think of Quetzalcoatl, the plume serpent, and also very central Mexico. Quetzalcoatl has his own temple at Teotihuacan, which is in the Mexico City area. It was huge. It was the biggest site of the kind of, pre-Columbian world, the earlier pre-Columbian world. So there's that, which ends with the Osiris silliness. And then Graham interviews a Maya archaeologist, Ed Barnhart, and Ed just does a fine job of just going through like the Maya number system, the Maya calendar system, the Maya number system in base 20, the Maya calendar system being basically 3 calendars in one. I've described this in other podcasts, but I have no problem. And this, as Ed describes things, this is the moment when I think some archaeologists will get really down on Ed. Like, how dare you? How dare you even be a part of Ancient Apocalypse? I don't mind it. Like, it goes back to my theme of like, look, we as archaeologists have lost. The pseudo-archaeology crowd has all media outlets and controls it all and controls the public idea of archaeology. So we need to meet them where they're at. So I'm really happy that Ed was a part of this. And I thought really sort of held his own and said the facts. So while Ancient Apocalypse is obviously full of shit and stupid, and the whole like ancient civilization at the end of the last ice age thing is just ludicrous and boring, at least people watching this get a fair shake on how the calendar works and how the Maya numbering system works. And Ed cruises around and talks about some more esoteric stuff like the ruler Pakal at Palenque, who's like the biggest one of all time, and his son, Khan Balam, which that's a whole big thing. Talks about the world tree, talks about how the Milky Way is symbolic of kind of the road to the afterlife. All good, all fair, all true, all fine facts and ideas from archaeology. So I got no problem that he did that. And there were one or two things that he said that I think were maybe taken out of context a little bit. He, like, Ed pushes that ragged edge of like, well, we in archaeology, I think he said, have very few facts. And the way that came out, it's like, I wouldn't have said that. I'd be like, no, we don't want to put us on the same level as pseudo archaeology, because we're not. We have facts. They don't, so I wouldn't have said that. That's the only thing I would really hit him for. The rest, hey, do the setup. Tell me how the numbers work. He did. He did talk about how the Maya sometimes refer to really old stuff. I believe he brought up like 33,000 years ago or like 5 million years ago. When the Maya do that, I think it's more reasonable and real to say the reason they do that is they're starting a story, and saying something like it happened 5 million years ago is the equivalent of saying a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, this happened. The Maya are setting the story to be like, no. This was in the ancient past. This was in the time of the gods. This was in the before time. That's what that means. So it's not a literal like, oh, we've been counting this for 5 million years. No. It's like when we say, it's an overstatement. It's like when we say, dude, that was like 1 million years ago. It wasn't literally 1 million years. That's what they're doing. So there's that as well. But overall, whatever. Again, they go on. They talk about the Maya. They talk about how the idea of the Milky Way or sort of souls going up that is a Pan-American belief. Like all cultures believe that. They don't. There's a lot of variety in that. So that wasn't correct. And Graham ends up the whole like they're all connected. They're not. That's incorrect. He doubles down at the very end, going back to that rock art site in the Amazon, and is like, and so basically, and therefore this stuff has been around for 13,000 years based on my false date of this rock art site, which of course he doesn't say this, but it's that ending is just sort of silly, oh, it must the only way for this to be true is through extraordinary coincidence. No, it's not. So it sort of ends with that sort of wah, wah, wah. I think he walks out with Keanu Reeves one more time. Okay, whatever. But it sort of does that end in a whimper. So that's it. He does do this little credit at the very end where he's like, and I have to credit scientific archaeology for some of these breakthroughs. That was nice. I'm like, hey, thanks, man. But at the end, as of course you've been able to figure out from my rants, it's just all incorrect. And what's sad, I keep coming back to this, it's just, man, what a waste of time and money. And Graham shows us that if he did this for real, if he did a real show, he could totally do it and kick ass. He totally could. He could do a real show just on White Sands. He could do a real show just on the Amazon and make a real show where it's still like fascinating. I think the best parts were actually White Sands and the Amazon. And if I had some sort of dare or some sort of point to make to Graham Hancock, I would just say this. I'd be like, hey, man, instead of doing this and rehashing this stuff, here's what my dare would be. I'd be like, Graham, you have access to a lot of money and a lot of people in this world of bringing like archaeology to the public. Why don't you pay or get a company of some kind to pay for some new LiDAR to be done in the Amazon? Because there's huge swaths of the Amazon where LiDAR still hasn't been done. There's so much more to do. Why don't you do a big strip of LiDAR, have it done, and we'll see what structures come up, and just give the data to me or people like me, and you do it, and we both give our translations of what happened. Therefore, like, no matter what, you can say whatever. There's actual real data that you've added to the archaeological past. I just think that would be really, really cool. If he just went like, you know what? I'm going to do like a, like 500 square kilometer swath of new LiDAR data. That would be awesome for everyone. Like we could really do something good with that. So that's where I would land. It's, do you guys need to watch this? No. I do think there's less interest in this than there was in the first one. And it sort of, even for myself, I knew I had to watch it, and I was kind of like, it wasn't something I felt like wasn't really into. But hey, man, we did it. We made it to the end. There was no super civilization. And I think we're all fine with that. And with that, I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for listening to the Pseudo Archaeology Podcast. Please like and subscribe wherever you like and subscribe. And if you have questions for me, Dr. Andrew Kinkella, feel free to reach out using the links below or go to my YouTube channel, Kinkella Teaches Archaeology. See you guys next time.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Culturo Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Rachel Roden.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.